Bet you can't tell that's a VW Beetle Coupe Classic. That doesn't look like no classic to me. And when I think classic, I think 1965, 1969, 1958. This is 2015. Now, this one I did the air conditioning. I recovered it. As you can see, my stickers here. I don't have a date filled in because I did not come back and recharge it. So they know before they deliver it to the customer, if they don't see my date here, they got to call me up. They taped off all the openings to the air conditioning, sealed them all off. That line was damaged, so the liquid and suction line going all the way back to the expansion valve, they taped it off. And they tape off everything. Especially, not only yourself, but all these vehicles are so different. And you know, sometimes you have electrical plugs that aren't plugged into anything. But if you have one technician pull apart a car, and then you have another technician put the car back together, they don't know if there was 2 or 3 plugs dangling out where they plug into. And sometimes they plug into places they shouldn't plug into, and they're just left dangling out. There were options that weren't used. So this way, anything that was used is taped off has to be untaped, and you know there's some place to put it back on. One of the biggest shop losses I see in money, time, angry customers, bad reviews on Yelp, and anything else they could put a bad review on, is when the shop owner has one technician take apart a car and a different technician put it together. That creates the most problems that you can ever imagine. We could do that back in my dad's and my grandfather's days, back in the 50s and 40s in my grandfather's day, no problem. Back in my dad's days in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, no problem. Back in my early days, back in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, no. As you got into the smog and emissions programs, you got so many wires, vacuum lines, and now you put on top of that electric cars, on top of hybrid cars, different year, make, models, and you have so many connections. When you have these old fools that run shops, just because they ran shops for 40 years ago, or that it might be second generation, usually they're smart enough by then. You don't have one technician pull it apart and another technician put it back together. That's where you get complaints where guys grab the wrong screws, and they might put a sheet metal screw through a machine fitting, a machine screw, or they might take a machine bolt or screw and put it where there should have been a sheet metal screw. When that goes to a different shop, you get a bad name. You get guys leaving stuff loose. You get guys pulling out bolts, and say some bolts were, let's say 35 millimeters, and there's 1 or 2 special bolts that were 40 millimeters, and they reverse them. Well, maybe one bottoms out and busts the casting on something. Maybe another one didn't take enough threads in, and it rips out 10,000 miles down the road on the customer, and it was something you put back on. It ends up back in the shop, and then after the customer finds one problem, they start nitpicking everything. Or it goes out of the body shop and then back to their regular mechanic who does all their oils, lubes, tires, their tune-ups, and they see a whole bunch of nuts and bolts in the wrong places. Maybe they see a leaking clamp because they reused an O-ring in the body shop that put it back together. Then that mechanic, who is devoted to the customer and the customer's welfare, because that's his customer, he wants to take care of his customer, he said, whoa, who the hell worked on your car? And then they start nitpicking and looking for every little flaw. Then that customer has a laundry list and either goes back, and the shop loses time because they got to fix everything because one guy took it apart and another guy put it back together. Or the customer goes, hell, you guys just fix it and replace whatever you see. I'm never going back to that shop again. I'll never recommend anybody back to that shop again, or give them a bad review on Google and Yelp and Facebook and LinkedIn and stuff like that. So you old shops who have one guy take it apart and another guy put it together, you cause your own problems. You are your worst enemy. Yes, it might be cheaper to have, you think it's cheaper, but not in the long run, to have a guy who's inexperienced because it's easy to take things apart. But if you can't put them back together, and you have somebody else put them back together just because he's old and he has a lot of experience, it's still going to take him a lot longer. And he's still going to make mistakes. It is going to happen. It's bound to happen. So the owner is responsible and the one guilty party who causes these problems, especially if he goes out and hires inexperienced techs. It's the owner's problem. Anything wrong that happens on a car, it's not the employee, it's partially the employee, but it's the owner's mindset and his temperament and the way he handles his employees on their methods of repair and how thorough they are. It's all the owners of the shop's responsibility. You want to find fault, point the finger at the owner, and that's where it is. This is one of the better shops. This is one of the shops where I bring my own car when it gets in damage. All right guys, I'll see you later. And just a little heads up on who causes a lot of these coming back on cars. Yes, you could have Space Cadet employees. It does happen. Sometimes we're not always thinking, but it's usually cause shit rolls downhill and the biggest turd is up on the top of the hill. All right, see you guys.